Hello, my name is Bob Nelson. I practice with Nelson & Nelson in Belleville, Illinois. I'm here to talk to you about a workers' compensation issue, and that is the average weekly wage. The average weekly wage is critical in every single workers' compensation case that it has been decided or that you may handle. The reason it's critical is because it determines how much money a person receives while they're off work. It's 2/3 of the average weekly wage. Important also because it determines how much money a person receives for their permanent injury. Generally speaking, a person is awarded weeks of payments, and those weeks are valued at 60% of a person's average weekly wage. So if we talk about what the law says, we would want to consider the Sylvester case particularly. The Sylvester case discusses how you come up with an average for the 52 weeks prior to an injury. A simple way might be just to divide the earnings by 52. And according to Sylvester, that works fine if a person receives an ordinary salary. There's no mystery to what a person's average weekly wage is if they receive a salary because it's the same all the time. But more important and more ordinary are cases where a person is not necessarily working every single day. So if you consider the average wage of a construction worker, he perhaps doesn't work more than 200 days a year. Or if you consider the average weekly wage of a school teacher, it's the same sort of thing. In neither case would you divide the annual earnings by 52. Instead, you'd divide the annual earnings by the number of weeks they actually work. That can be determined by looking at how many days a person works. A construction worker might say, I worked 200 days in the year before the injury. Next, you'd ask, how many days are in an ordinary week? And if that worker says 5, then you would know that that construction worker worked 40 weeks in the year before the injury. Those weeks are not necessarily continuous. They may be 1/5 of a week here and 2/5 of a week there. Once you determine the number of weeks that a person works, then it's easy to divide their annual earnings by the proper number of weeks. So one might consider, what are the components of the average weekly wage? For example, if a person has a part-time job, is that included or is that not? What about fringe benefits, overtime, bonuses, vacation? So going through those, initially, a part-time job earnings from a part-time job are included in the average weekly wage so long as the responsible employer is aware of that work. Fringe benefits, pretty much not, unless you happen to work for a pastor who has a parsonage, for example, or you work for someone who's given a free car, or a person gets a per diem. And in each of those situations, you try to figure the real economic value of that fringe benefit. But retirement, health care, no, those are not included. Vacation is. So if your client says, hey, I worked all 52 weeks, didn't take a vacation, but they paid me for it, right, those earnings are in the average weekly wage. Overtime is the component that is most in question. The Act, Section 10, specifically excludes overtime, but the courts and the Commission have historically included overtime, albeit at a straight time rate, if the overtime is either extraordinarily regular or is mandatory. It's easy to tell if overtime is mandatory if the boss says you can be fired if you don't show up. But also as a practical matter, there is overtime that is mandated. For the CNA who says, I couldn't just leave my patients and my replacement never showed up. Or the concrete driver who says, I parked my truck after 8 hours, but I had to rinse it out or the concrete would have set up. When you put on proof to determine the average weekly wage, to make sure that you comply with Section 10 and with Sylvester, of course you'll want to make sure that you have information showing how many days your client missed. The construction worker worked only 200 days. If you have how many days your client worked or how many days your client missed, then you can determine how many weeks that person worked. Again, by learning how many weeks are in an ordinary, how many days are in an ordinary week. Sometimes a contract book can be helpful if you happen to represent a union worker. Of course, bringing in a pay stub showing what the hourly scale is important. And again, bringing in something to show how many days your client actually worked in the year before the injury. The days that he missed, it should be clear, are days that were missed for reasons unavoidable to him: sickness, sickness of a child, absence of work, etc. For more information on determining average weekly wage, please view my full presentation recorded during the Workers' Compensation Update 2016 program, now available on the ISBA official CLE archive.